How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Soul Ward. I'm Bryce Newberger. And what was today? Sunday? So yesterday, Saturday, I had some Jehovah's Witnesses come to my house. Now, last week, they came to my house. It was two women. They knocked on my door. We had a brief interaction. It was pretty friendly. They were like, everything bad happening in the world. What gives you peace? And I knew where they were going, so I just beat them to the punch. And I said, the fact that, God's kingdom is here today. And we have vastly different understandings of what that means. But it was kind of an olive branch to start the conversation on a good note. As we got to talking, it became clear that I was going to be beyond what they could handle at the door. So the woman said, let me bring my husband to you. He's a doctor. And I assume probably not a medical doctor, and I would learn not a medical doctor, but he has some sort of doctorate in some sort of subject. And I thought, that's great. Invite him back. She said, we'll come Friday at 10 to 10:30, or if we don't make it, we'll come Saturday from 10 to 10:30. No, it wasn't Friday. It was Thursday. Thursday, 10 to 10:30, or Friday, 10 to 10:30, or Saturday, 10 to 10. Either way, they didn't show up the first day. I filmed a different video. And then they showed up yesterday. So it was really cool. They came, they sat in my office. We had a long conversation. And on our conversation, I didn't record the audio for it. Unfortunately, my mic, I'm using a micro USB cable for my Nano Yeti. And I was using this is the cable to my Pro controller for my Xbox controller. And for whatever reason in OBS, it didn't pick up the audio. So I was so heartbroken. But I still thought we should cover how the conversation went. I don't know that they'll be back, but I invited them back. And so the rundown of how it went was it started off with his wife was new to America. So hi, welcome to America. She's been here for 4 years. So we talked about that. He also traveled quite a bit. And so I think doing some missionary work. And so that was pretty cool. We started with the introduction, and the man announced that he is he works in the water industry, purifying water that comes into the valley of Arizona, the Phoenix Valley of Arizona. And if you guys know, our water here is just terrible. It's really hard water. And so he's working to help that. And I could see his lead in with this. Water needs to be purified. And I could see where he was, sending his pitch. But he turned it over to me. And I had mentioned that I'm a pastoral counselor, that I work with psychology and I work with theology. I mentioned that I help people who are coming out of various religions and dealing with religious abuse and potentially religious addiction, as well as, stereotypical run-of-the-mill addiction. Not that there is such a thing. But so my lead-in was the witness. Why trust Jehovah's Witnesses? And I gestured to my books and I said, you're going to knock on my door and you're going to tell me everything I've read, everything I've studied for the past 20 years is incorrect. And so that I've got the wrong God and the wrong gospel. And so you better have a pretty good pitch, is kind of how I turned it over to him. So his pitch, turning it back over to them, is that the kingdom of God came in 1914 as this invisible return. So my response to that was, I would agree that the kingdom's here, but I believe the upside down kingdom that Jesus ushered in was heralded at the Sermon on the Mount, but really with the birth and raising of Christ in the beginning of his 3-year ministry. But that kingdom that God talked about, where the king comes down and dies for the servant, right, where we are inherited into the kingdom, the meek, to shame the wise, all of that is already here and unavailable to us. So we agree in some senses, because what's quite common amongst Christians is to say, I can't wait to die and go to heaven, right? I can't wait for eternity. And they treat this life like a footnote. To a degree, the analogy of the rope that pastors like to use, and they mark a little bit on this rope, and they have a rope running all the way down the sanctuary out the doors, and they go, this little speck here is now, yes, that's true. And that's a good analogy for framing eternity compared to now. But what happens in this speck of time determines where you go for the rope, right? For the rest of the rope, and how things go. And not only that, but the injustice that God cares deeply about, we can take action for today. I can love my neighbor today. I can love my enemy today, right? I can do social justice today. I don't have to relegate that to being just time for heaven. In fact, we have precious gems that we can receive as rewards here today. I believe it's the people that we help, in terms of salvation. I believe it's knowledge of God, which won't pass away. So our time spent studying the Lord will have eternal benefits. It's relationships that we foster here that will carry with us into eternity. So there's these precious gems we can have today. So the difference, though, is that for the Jehovah's Witness, an apocalypse is coming. And unless you really listen to the secret, servants, the secret slave, faithful slave of God, which are 8 to 10 men in New York, unless you obey them unquestioningly and do everything they say, you will be destroyed come the apocalypse. And not only that, but if you believe them and then you fall away from believing them, you can be eradicated. You could be annihilated, body and soul. So he said, my, gospel to you is basically the kingdom has come. And I said, I do agree. The kingdom has come. But now let's talk about what kind of kingdom. And so I laid out this challenge to them. I said, okay, let's talk about, the kind of God that we have here. And so, when I was pointing out to him, I was saying, hey, we've got, one God over here, and we've got one God over there. And I broke it down. I said, the God, the witness, and the gospel are the three, right? So I was saying, like, over here, we've got the God, and talking about their God did not love me enough to die for me. He had to send an angel. And the Bible says, greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for another. And so the God of all love, I believe, came down and died for me. So my God over here, he died for my sins. Their God over there sent an angel to die for my sins. Next is the witness, right? So, because right, I brought up the ontological argument. And I was saying, okay, the first step, God versus God, that's kind of an ontological argument. Who has the greater God? And I said, now the ontological argument has boundaries of where it falls apart, where it works and where it falls apart. I think when you're comparing deities in different religions, it works to compare them to one another. However, after that, now we've got to go, okay, but what's the truth, right? So just because I can conceive something, right, doesn't necessarily make it true. So let's talk about the witness. So we talk about the God. What's on offer here? My God versus their God. My God came down, died for me. Their God sent an angel to die for me. He doesn't love me enough to come down and do it himself. So my God is greater than their God if we're measuring love. Now, and the Bible makes it clear, the God of all love, right? We will be known by our love, right? The Bible compares God as a good father. If you then, being evil, will give good gifts to your children, how much your Father in heaven, being good, will give eternal life to those who ask it. So next is the gospel. Next is the witness. So the witness is, Jehovah's Witnesses have no credential, no academics, no church historical standing, and appeal to 4 common heresies. And so, when I brought this up, I said, well, your New World Translation, you say it's the best. But when we look at who the translators were, the one we know has no training in biblical Greek. He has a little bit of regular Greek, right? So he can open a gyro with, or he can order a gyro with tzatziki sauce, but he's not trained in biblical Greek. So who are the other translators? Well, they're anonymous. You can't know them. And I brought up the water filter. I said, okay, you deal with water purification. If I show up at your door and I say, this water filter is the best water filter that exists, you're not going to take my word for it. You're going to go, well, what's in the filter? And I'm going to say, well, you can't know, but you just have to trust me. That's not going to fly. You need to know what this water filter is made out of. So speaking his language, contextualizing to him. Meanwhile, on my view, which also has a broader spectrum I can appeal to, because there's a lot of views that I see as valid, that I can even disagree with and play with and adopt and move and shift within my belief system. But theirs is so narrow, right? It's only them. And so, I was saying that, basically when it comes to like all these guys on my shelf, I've got church history. I've got academic credentials. I've got, thought leaders, theologians, doctors, mathematicians. I've got all of this going from my view. And so the witness is not just me and him. I said, we can get in a debate. We can bring up scriptures and we can talk about why that means, why you're wrong about what it means and I'm right about what it means, and back and forward we can go. But at the end of the day, we might lose either to bad strategy, bad thought process, nerves, lack of knowledge and preparation. So I was saying, we can get into it. But at the end of the day, even if I were to convince you or you were to convince me, you would have to go, okay, but now did I just lose a debate or was that true? And that's why the witness is so important when we talk about these things. And last is the gospel. The gospel for them is trust the men in New York, do everything that they say, and you will be saved come Armageddon. My gospel is God has already saved us, that Jesus is our high priest, and we have direct access to the Father and inheritance to the kingdom, that we can't earn salvation, we don't need to work for it, and there's nothing we can do to earn it or deserve it. It's a free gift of God. Whereas they have to put in community service hours, they have to work hard on passing out literature and all of this. And so I was saying, the gospel, my gospel is just better than your gospel. So when we look at the God, the witness, and the gospel, my God is greater than your God, just from an ontological standpoint. My witness is greater than your witness from an academic and historical standpoint. And my gospel is better news than your gospel. So I could be led into believing in a lesser God if the academics point there, if the text points there, if it's reality, then I want to believe what's true. But you don't have the witness to point me there. Also, I can be pointed into believing in a lesser gospel, right? Hey, Bryce, maybe you need to realize the news actually isn't that good. But again, you need to have the backing for that. You need to be able to convince me logically, academically through it. Now, revisiting that, the wife, she ended up saying, like, hey, I want to talk to what you said. She said, for me, I'm not that important. The God up there who's so mighty, who's so great, it's kind of audacious. She didn't use that word, but that was, she was communicating, for me to think that he would have to come down and die for me, sending an angel, that's just going to be enough. And so this is where it got kind of, I think, a little uncomfortable for the husband, because I turned to her and I said, well, my God would say, you're beautifully and wonderfully made. Zephaniah says that he sings praises over you, that you're his masterpiece, that you are worth it, that if you were the only one who was lost, that my God would come down, he would leave the 99 to save you, the only lost lamb. And so again, that's where we got into this. My God is more loving than your God. My God will do more for me. And so as I began to tell her, like, hey, like, you're beautiful and wonderful, like the Lord has created you, you could see the husband get a little uncomfortable. And he got to the point where, like, hey, let me just stop you right there. And I don't think he thought I was coming on to his wife or anything. I think they're both beautiful people. But ultimately, I think he just realized, I think he might have been worried that the good news of my gospel might be too tempting for his wife. I think, that she can be seen as higher and valued and loved by God, and that he would sacrifice himself for her. So, this is where the husband kind of steps in and he's like, hey, obviously, we're not going to convince you. What he was saying is that basically, he's like, if you want the academics, yeah, we don't have that. So it was interesting and cool to see him kind of acknowledge that. And so, I said, okay, well, and he was going to end the conversation there. I wasn't quite ready to let them go. So I revisited it and what was it? I said, okay. So, back and forward, you and I, let's quick have a little pebble in the shoe moment, as scripture calls it, right? I'll tell you what my pebble in the shoe is for you before you leave. I'd say, I want you to know that the free gift is yours. You just have to accept it, right? That's what I would tell you. I'd say, you don't have to strive. You don't have to worry about obeying these men. Your high priest is Jesus. The free gift is yours. And so before we depart, before we leave, I just want to let you know the history points to it, that I've got a greater God, a greater gospel, and an easier path, and it's yours if you want it. All you have to do is accept it. I said, now what would your pebble in the shoe be to me? And he's like, well, I don't want to put a pebble in your shoe. I was like, well, no, that's biblical, right? It's biblical to put a pebble in my shoe. So, please feel free to put a pebble in my shoe. That's, scriptural. And so he said, well, for him, it's the faithful community of believers, that when he is connected to his faithful community of believers, that he finds this love and this joy and this peace as he's with all these other people. Okay. And I wanted to give him the freedom to put that pebble in my shoe. I didn't want to attack him right away. I could have said, well, what about when it comes to shunning, right? What about when it comes to splitting up families? What about when it comes to when you begin to question your doctrine and you get ostracized, right? That is not so loving. And you're on this side now, so the water's good. But if you go over to, if you begin to question, you begin to go outside of your bounds of your teaching, you said, well, listen, I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore, but I'd still like to hang out with you guys. They'd be like, no, get out of here. And so, they were with me for about 57 minutes total. And what I told him, to his response about that community, and he brought up the academics and how I had all the academics, but he had love. I said, okay, well, I'd love to just respond to that real quick. And I said, I can explain with archaeology, with mathematics, with philosophy, logic, with church history, why my view is correct, like why I'm a Christian. I said, but ultimately, when it comes down to why Jesus, why am I a Christian? It's because Jesus fixed what is broken. My God has found me and rescued me and been with me during the dark night of the soul. God has seen me through so much. And so, yeah, I like to defend my faith. I like to reason with my faith. I like to explain my faith. I like to entertain arguments and play with thought experiments. I find joy in that because that's just kind of naturally what my brain goes to. But at the end of the day, I'm a Christian because Jesus found me. He left the 99 and he rescued me. That's why Jesus for me. That's why I'm so passionate. That's why I'm so in love with my God. And so it was a good conversation. It was a friendly conversation. It was respectful. It was friendly. And we got off to a really good foot. So I did leave them as they left. I offered them a piece of paper that had all my arguments, leading from the ontological argument, my issues with, what I have issues with in their religion, all of it. And I said, do you have any literature for me? Because I know that they, have to hand out a certain amount of tracts to a certain amount of pamphlets to meet a quota. And I was like, let me try to help with that. And they're like, oh, we don't actually do that anymore. And I was like, oh, that's okay, cool. Like now they point to the website. I said, well, let me leave you with this. And I said, if I'm wrong, show me where I'm wrong, right? Whether you or someone in your church wants to come back and chat with me. But, if I'm wrong, then show me where I'm wrong. Point out my flaw. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, it seems that I've got the greater God, the greater gospel, and the greater witness. So there we left it. It was very friendly. It was very good. He thanked me for being so hospitable, for inviting him in. I let him know that he doesn't deserve abuse when people yell at him or anything, and I would say if a Jehovah's Witness knocks on your door, be respectful, be kind, let your wisdom be your witness, right? Not your anger, right? We'll be known by our love. So be very loving when a Jehovah's Witness, a Mormon, anyone knocks at your door. I also want to recommend that you pick up my $5 book on why I cannot be Jehovah's Witness. And the other one, why I cannot be Mormon, just as a pamphlet to go over some of these things and prep you. So that way, when they do knock on your door, you can be prepared to give a defense for your faith, right? So anyways, I thought that was interesting. I thought I'd share it with you guys. I loved the interaction. I hope to see them again or someone from their church again. Ultimately, though, I have a sneaking suspicion that I've seen the last of them. So that's unfortunate, but maybe as they go out through the neighborhood, I'll wave them down. Hi, how's it going? All right, guys. I'm going to get ready for church and go to church myself. My baby's sleeping, but I got to wake him up soon and go off to my own place of worship. So God bless you guys, and I hope you have a Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho. Bye-bye.